भारत विश्व का ऐसा देश जिसे पहचाना जाता है उसकी सभ्यता, संस्कृति और कला के लिए। उसी कला का एक नमूना है वास्तुकला यानी आर्किटेक्चर। ताजमहल, अजंता एलोरा केव्स, कोणार्क मंदिर, गेटवे ऑफ इंडिया, जामा मस्जिद जैसी कई प्रसिद्ध बिल्डिंग्स ने हमारे इस देश को विश्व में एक अलग पहचान दी है। यह एक ऐसी कला है जो सदियों से चलती आ रही है। क्या आप जानते हैं, हिंदू पुराण के अनुसार विश्वकर्मा को वास्तुकला का भगवान माना जाता है। उन्होंने कई देवी देवताओं के लिए बेहद खूबसूरत शहर और महल बनाए। उनकी कुछ लाजवाब कारीगरी है सतयुग में स्वर्ग, त्रेता युग में लंका और द्वापर युग में द्वारका। शायद यही वजह है कि आज भी हम किसी भी इमारत की नींव रखने से पहले भूमि पूजन करते हैं। इस दुनिया को मॉडर्न और बेहतर बनाने में आर्किटेक्चर फ्रेटर्निटी का बहुत बड़ा योगदान है। हमारे देश ने कई दिग्गज और प्रतिभाशाली आर्किटेक्ट्स की कला को देखा और सराहा। बीवी दोषी, चार्ल्स कोरिया, राज रेवाल जैसे कई दिग्गजों ने हमारे देश को मॉडर्न और फ्यूचरिस्टिक बनाने में अपना पूरा जीवन समर्पित किया और हमारे देश का नाम पूरे विश्व में रोशन कर दिया। इतना ही नहीं, बल्कि ले कॉर्बुज़िए, एडविन ल्यूटन्स, लुइस कान और लॉरी बेकर जैसे कई दिग्गज विदेशी आर्किटेक्ट्स को भी भारत में काम करने का मौका मिला। चलिए तो इन सभी की जिंदगी से प्रेरणा लेते हुए शुरू करते हैं एक नया सफर जिसका नाम है लेजेंड्स ऑफ डिजाइन।
नमस्कार, आदाब, सत श्री अकाल, केम छो। दोस्तों, मैं करण मेहता आप सभी का स्वागत करता हूं लेजेंड्स ऑफ डिजाइन के पहले एपिसोड में। लेजेंड्स ऑफ डिजाइन एक ऐसा शो है जो हमारे आर्किटेक्चर इंडस्ट्री के दिग्गजों की लाइफ को सेलिब्रेट करता है। हमारे आज के जो गेस्ट हैं, उन्होंने हमेशा से अपने काम में अपनी वैल्यूज को जिंदा रखा। मैंने हमेशा सुना था कि बी अ पीपल्स पर्सन, बट व्हेन आई मेट हिम आई केम टू नो दैट ही इज अ पीपल्स आर्किटेक्ट। तो आइए देखते हैं हमारे आज के इस गेस्ट की एक छोटी सी झलक।
I have a dream. I think about one day when everyone in this country will have lovable, livable, affordable, safe and secure shelter. That's my ultimate dream. Architecture actually never happens on a drawing board. It always happens at the site. Sustainability is not a worn-out word, especially for the world of architecture, because I believe that fraternity is playing a very important role if you are talking about keeping this world green and alive. Everything that you are going to build has to be built responsibility. It has to be morally right. I am Shankar. I belong to Habitat Technology Group, which is one of the largest NGO initiatives in the world.
So, ladies and gentlemen, may I now please call upon the living legend. He's been awarded the most prestigious Padma Shree and more than 14 national awards by the Government of India. Let us all welcome him together, Dr. Gopal Nair Shankar. Shankar sir, I thank you very much from the bottom of my heart to be here with us today, and welcome to the show Legends of Design, and we are shooting our first episode with you. It's an honor to have you with us.
It's actually my pleasure and it's my privilege too.
Thank you, sir. So sir, let's begin the conversation. We have a lot of youngsters here with us, and sometime you are also probably their age. Can you just tell them how was your childhood like? Where were you born?
I was actually born and brought up in East Africa, where my father was actually working for the British government, and my mother was a Swahili teacher in Africa. I was there till my primary classes, and then I came back to Tiruvalla, which is my native place in Kerala, and I had the rest of the education there in Kerala. That was my school education. I have some memories about the African landscapes. Those days, the places where my father was working, places like Arusha, Morogoro, Zanzibar and Tanganyika together. Now they are two different countries, Tanzania and Zanzibar. My foster mother was an African lady who belonged to Maasai tribe. So
the famous
Maasai tribe, yeah.
Yes.
And the first language that I actually learned was not Malayalam, but the first language that I learned was Swahili, the language of my foster mother. I would actually call her as foster mother because she was the person actually who brought me up, because my mother was a busy teacher and all the daytime she was with me. I was a tiny toddler that time. And African landscape, I have very vivid memories about African landscape, wild animals coming to the courtyards, giraffes, zebras, the house, and my initial education was there. That was again something that I would cherish myself, because I was only brown-skinned person in those classes. The rest of them are all blacks, and yeah, I mean that's what I remember about Africa and my early childhood. After which, I came to Tiruvalla, I said, which is my mother's native place, and I had a problem there. I had a huge problem.
What was that?
Karen, I had bad stammering at that time. I couldn't speak well.
Yes.
I couldn't even complete one sentence because I had severe stammering at that time. And added to that was my basic language problem, in the sense my parents put me in a Malayalam medium school in Kerala. And I didn't know even the alphabets. I could understand Malayalam, but I didn't know the language. So I didn't know even the alphabets. I didn't know how to read and write. So those days, I still remember, we used to have somebody who would come to your house and take your fingers and write on the soil, Mother Earth.
Okay.
that was when I started feeling the Mother Earth, you know. Actually, the language, Malayalam, came to me through my fingers, you know.
Oh, interesting.
In a year's time, I could read books in the local language. That's how I started my language exercises, yeah.
So, there is an interesting story. When you were studying or you were being there in Africa, your father was working there, and then there was a time when you had to relocate to India. So, what was that incident?
Yeah, I mean, like when my father, I told you, he was in British government service, and the Britishers were leaving, you know. All these African countries were getting independence at that time. And being a British government official, my parents were given an option either to go to UK, which was actually dream openings in UK, but my father decided otherwise. He wanted to come back to India and start living here, you know. And that was a critical decision. Probably that led me into amazing vistas which I took later. And he was one person who was very patriotic at heart.
Correct.
And slowly this sense of patriotism probably got to me also. Correct. Even those days there was a land of, you know, opportunities. He would have, you know, he would have started living a probably better, secure life there, you know, in UK. Instead, he wanted to get back to the roots.
True.
This is very important, you know.
True.
Getting back to the roots is very important in each one of us life's journey, you know. Yeah.
That's good. So moving ahead, how were your college days? What was that moment when you decided that yes, I want to become an architect?
It was actually the result of an evolution that happened during my school days, you know. I started working for some social movements at a very, very young age, the age of 10. You know.
Age of 10?
Age of 10, you know. Those days, in those states, many things were happening. And I slowly got entangled in a social movement for popularizing science. We wanted science to reach out to the common man. So we had several activities linked to that. And one of the activities was to sell books, you know, demystify science and make it very simple. And we were actually telling people how technology and science could enhance their livelihood opportunities. And so we published small little booklets in our local language, and I started selling them to the, you know, households and things like that. And also, that time, when I was in the 6th standard, 7th standard, we used to sell a new innovative, this thing that we developed, you know, Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad developed. That was actually usage of smokeless chulas. So, you know, old days, you know, we used to take a lot of fuels, you know, wood as the basic fuel, and that used to emit a lot of toxic gases. So we used to get, those days, those who worked in the kitchen used to get lots of lung disorders because of the toxic gases. So we developed a chula which used minimum amount of fuel and take the same heat, you know. So that was the innovative to the households and sell it for a price. But the idea was to, you know, sort of sell technologies and science, basic sciences to the common man. So that actually led me to varying forays, and later I got entangled in another process, you know, talk about total literacy. Even now, after so many decades, I realize that one of the most deprived classes in our society is the traditional fisherman society. I had a great opportunity when I was right in the middle school to work with, sort of be with the most deprived, most marginalized. You know, what happened to that sector was the traditional fishermen lost their jobs because trawling came in, you know, mechanized boating came in, and they didn't have ways. So we want to empower them, you know, through literacy by teaching them. So at that age, you look at it, as in the 6th standard, 7th standard, we had to go to the fishermen's chalets, what we now call as chalets, huts, where the women folk would come after selling fish on the streets. They would come back home late in the evening with the scent of fish all over. They used to take a bath before they come to this thing. They used to cook a morsel of food which used to share. What they called a house, to me, it was not unacceptable. It was kind of unacceptable even at that age, because it didn't have toilets, it didn't have proper spaces for the ladies, no dignity, nothing. And then we used to sit together, and I used to teach them how to read and write. That is a huge exercise, actually, which when I go back in my memories, that actually showed I never knew that there's such poverty in our country, I belong to an upper middle class family.
Okay.
And the first time I was feeling poverty, and I was experiencing poverty, I was seeing a population without tomorrows. You see, I mean, these people don't have tomorrows. If the sea goes rough, they won't be able to go to the sea and catch fish.
That means hand to mouth.
I'm telling you, they didn't have even proper one meal a day, most deprived classes. And when I held their hands at that age, I thought, whatever I'm going to learn should be for these kind of people who form the majority of Indian population. And later, when the time of choice came to select my profession, I took architecture because I thought through architecture I can hold their hand and do some meaningful interventions in the sector. That's how I slowly turned to architecture. I did my architecture from the College of Engineering, Trivandrum, and those 4 days, I should tell you that this is actually the students. I had an excess of Renaissance architecture, Reformist architecture, excess of that. But to me, I wanted to learn about the legacy of Indian architecture, the legacy of Indian polity, which talked about 50,000 rupees, 5 adults to live, and no other means. India is a land of opportunities, but the poor people didn't have choices. I wanted my teachers to teach me about that, how to design houses in a small plot for a small budget for an average Indian family. That actually, instead of that, I was taught, I told you, an excess of Western architecture. The legacy of Indian architecture was never there in the syllabus. Times have changed now. Now they have these things about sustainable architecture, legacy of traditional vernacular architecture is there in the syllabus. Those days it was not there. But I was very sure about what I'd want to do in life. And then something very exciting happened. That also I share at this particular moment. There was a white man who was actually doing some forays into architecture. Actually, I met him just before I decided to become an architect, because I saw him at a place, at a house site, which this white man was designing and building a house for one of my classmates during pre-university period. I saw him at the site. And I still remember that moment when this white person, I didn't know what an architect meant at that time, white person who was doing that building was arguing with the owner of that house. This particular owner, that's my friend's father, he had 5 children, 5 brilliant children. And the mathematics professor, the father, he wanted a 6-bedroom house, 5 bedrooms each for the children and 1 bedroom for himself. The white person who was designing the house was actually through gestures. I still remember the gesture. He said, Mr. Nambudiri was the name of this thing. Your children will all fly away after some time. And finally, the old man and the old woman will be alone in this house. Will you be able to manage such a big house? 6-bedroom house? But the owner was very adamant. He said, it's my money, my children, I want to give them, each one of them a room. But he said, see, look, Dr. Nambudiri, your children are all brilliant. They're academically focused. After a few years, they will start flying away. And after a few years, after a decade, after I graduated in architecture, I had the opportunity to go back to that particular house. I'll tell that story a little later. But the white man who did that building was none other than Laurie Baker.
Oh,
Laurie Baker, you know, the British architect who shed actually light into the. Then during the age of when I was a student of architecture, I thought what he was doing was right. But I didn't stop there. After my graduation, I actually went to Birmingham to do my master's in architecture. And later I had the opportunity to work with one of the top-notch, I don't want to reveal the names, but top-notch architects in India. And I realized that he was one person where there was no gap between the word and the deed. He was the man. Laurie Baker was the word, he was the man. There was no conflict between the word and the deed. And his buildings were happening all around me in Trivandrum, where I came from. And I realized that here is the right direction. I never worked with him. People think that I worked with him for a long time. I never worked with him. I probably learned like Dronacharya, you remember, I mean, like the old story of Ekalavya. He was the Dronacharya to me. Through his buildings, he inspired me, through his buildings. I never worked with him. I just barely knew him. And later, even now, let me tell you this, his buildings continue to inspire me. For an architect, each day is a crisis. Whenever I go tired, whenever I'm in a fix, I still go to, at my age, mind you, I go to a Baker building to get charged again because his way of handling spaces, deft way of looking at the vocabulary of building materials, they still intoxicate me, I'm telling you. They still can not only try to motivate me and inspire me and hold my hand, they continue to intoxicate me, That's the word that I want to use, yeah.
so our early projects are very special, but I'm aware that one of your first houses that you made was super special. I would like to ask my audience if they can guess within how much budget did sir make that house? Anyone? Anyone wants to guess it? 30 lakhs. Wrong.
50 to 60,000.
Wrong. 10 lakhs? No. Okay. Sir, why don't you answer?
About one of the first houses that I made, the residence that you are mentioning about is actually very close to my heart. It's a very precious milestone in my whole career. As you know, I've done 10,000s of buildings, but this particular building that I'm going to talk about is very special to me. I made that house in just 10,000 rupees.
₹10,000. A house in 10,000 rupees. That's
an interesting story about this house, When I started, after my master's from Birmingham, after working with top-notch architects, I came back to my place, Trivandrum, and I started Habitat Technology Group. Rest of it is history. But then I was very clear about what I want to do in my life. Sustainability probably is a worn out word now. But those days, I wanted my buildings to be as sustainable as possible. I was talking about eco-sensitive architecture, I was talking about energy-efficient architecture, I was talking about cost-efficient architecture, I was talking about resource-efficient architecture, I was talking about value-based architecture. I wanted to do that only, you know. I had made that choice. And there were no takers for that. I had to wait for, I'm telling you, I had to wait for 6 long months after taking my master's from England, having come out with such sterling colors. I had to wait for 6 long months to get my first client. There is this philosopher, a German philosopher, who said, between 1 and 0, 1 and none, there is an infinity. That's the distance that I cross. You know, this distance between 1 and 0, I remember that because it was a great wait. And then something happened. One of my friends, who was actually a member of one film society, and I was also in the cultural field at that time. He told me one day, Shankar, look, I got a small bit of land on the beach, 1.5 cents of land. You know how much 1.5 cents of land is around 60 square meters of plot. He came to me, he said, I don't have money, Shankar. I have 1.5 cents of land, and all I have, all my physical assets, was a number of books that he had acquired over the period of time. He was a writer. Just for your information, he was the first person, he was a freelance journalist, the first person who actually introduced Laurie Baker to Kerala. He was already, Laurie Baker was there, but one person who really introduced the legacy of Laurie Baker as the poor man's architect to Kerala population. And he was convinced about the technology. And I began designing a small house over 1.5 cents, 60 square meters of land. And I had a huge challenge. And one of the first buildings that I did, and that was a huge experience in the sense, it didn't have proper rooms. As we think about a house, we talk about proper rooms, so many bedrooms, so many. It had like one seamless space. There's a living space, there's a small dining space. The bedroom was a bed itself. It is a raised platform where they put a mattress, where my friend Velappan, his wife, and his small little tiny tot could sleep together. The bed was the bed space for him. The only private space in that particular house was a small toilet. And then I had to address his basic, not the physical requirement, but his metaphysical requirement. He wanted to, the one-liner design brief that was given to me, but he wanted a space where he could breathe letters. Books were his only physical asset. Let me tell you, books were his only physical assets. He wanted to have the world of letters around him. And this house, the core of this house, was a small library, a circular library that I built for him, where he could see the books, not cased books, where he could feel the books, he could smell the letters, and he was a writer, mind you. And the whole house was, centered around a small library. So it's a small library, a small living space, small dining space, a bed space, and that was the house. It was a few decades back. Interesting thing happened after that. A very interesting thing happened there. That boy was hardly 2 years old. His son was 2 years old at the time. But unfortunately later, almost a decade later, Velappan went away, he died. I lost connection with the family. So one day, a fine young man was walking to my house, to my office, and said, "Uncle, do you remember me?" I didn't have a clue, because I saw this little boy as a 2-year-old, infant. This boy comes in and introduces himself. "Uncle, I am so and so's son. My God, I couldn't believe that. This tiny is very fine. He said, I'm working in Infosys now. I'm an IT engineer now. And he wanted to get married to somebody. He wanted a space for, that little house didn't have space for another family. So he wanted a small room above the little house that I built. I said, look, my young friend, you have resources now. You're working in the IT sector. He said one little sentence to me, which I will never ever forget. He said, Uncle, I grew up in this house. I had my engineering education staying in the house. I love every corner of that house. I love very limited house, probably 325 square feet of house. I loved every corner of it because that's the space that molded me. And now I know that I have the resources, I'm in the IT sector, getting a fat salary and things like that. But when I get married, I want my girl to know about this particular environment that made me. And that's exactly why I want to build another room on top of that. And I don't want to leave that premise because that's the premise that made me. For an architect, I'm telling you, it's a very touching moment for an architect. You know, you do things, you build houses, you design houses for one individual. I built that house for Velapan. Normally, that is where I, differ from some of the other architects. You build a house, you always build a house with an identity for some person. I've never in my life, I've never built two houses alike. I built for a person with a name and an identity. This identity, Velapan's house, his house is special to me because it responded to his needs. And look at the legacy. The son also remembers that. And he also doesn't want to leave that premise. That's how you should actually, in future, when you design houses, you should do that. You should break the hold. Go into that. It's not a landscape. It's not only the context. It's also the mindscape that should decide about the design requirements. Yeah.
Shankar sir, you are also known for your contribution in disaster-resistant architecture. Can you please share it with your audience? How did this journey start?
Yeah, that's an interesting story, in fact. In 1984, Bhopal gas tragedy happened. None of you were there at that time. You were all born after that. 84. And as I told you, right during the school days, I was actually active with the popular science movement.
Yeah.
And we went in a train. The whole train was hired. And social activists from Kerala, we went all the way by train to Bhopal to shout slogans against Union Carbide factory. We raised slogans like Hatyari Carbide, Hatao, and things like that, on the streets of Bhopal. But later, a few months later, I was called by the government of India to do rehabilitation projects for the gas victims.
Okay.
Just for your information, more than around 1,000 people slept to death on a fateful evening in Bhopal. From the factory, poisonous gases leaked, and people who were, sleeping on the streets, they inhaled this toxic gas and they went to death. And my job was to rehabilitate them. It was a prestige project. I was still very young at that time, and prestigious project. I did around 400 buildings in the outskirts of Bhopal for gas victims. That actually, again, led me to interesting, like the chief minister at that time, who came to inaugurate the housing colony. He was fascinated by the quality of architecture of those small houses. He wanted a house for himself, a farmhouse for himself. And that was again going to be built in the outskirts of Bhopal. And I built a small farmhouse for the then Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh. This is something which is very important for you. The same technologies that I used for the victims were used for the Chief Minister's house also. I don't segregate these things. Whatever I use for the common people, I use it for the richer people also. Because in India, technology actually percolates down. It never, it's always top-down kind of thing. Now in Bhopal, I did the farmhouse, and people who came, journalists, the press club of Bhopal, they came in numbers for the housewarming ceremony of the Chief Minister's farmhouse in the outskirts. Then I was asked to design a Patrakar colony in Bhopal. That's how your journey starts, And after Bhopal, I had the opportunity, rare opportunity, to work with all the disaster situations that had happened ever since 1984.
Oh.
In 1999, the super cyclone happened in Odisha, and I had built up a medical college right, actually the cyclone came through a place called Paradeep in Odisha, and I had built up a medical college. At that time, 99, I had already completed medical college using the same technologies that I'm talking about. And actually the cyclone, it came from the sea and hit one of the first buildings that was hit was the medical college that I had designed. Everything else was devastated, and it sustained major damages. Not my medical college, which was built using cost-effective, sustainable building technology. It never, so that became a bit testimonial to the technologies that I'm talking about. And disasters are major opportunities. I wanted to use disasters as a vehicle to promote what I call as technology opportunities, to promote cost-effective technology, sustainable technology, using that opportunity, So I did that, and then I was called to strategize on the rehabilitation policies of Odisha. That was a great experience. Latest disaster happened in Uttarakhand. And there also, all across Uttarkashi, Uttarakhand, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, I worked wherever disasters happened, I worked. In 2004, tsunami happened. And tsunami, I was all around the world. I worked with UN and World Bank and International Development Organization right across Asia, from Indonesia to Thailand to, I was there all over, Maldives to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, one of the largest rehabilitation effort that has ever taken place in the social history of the world. 95,000 houses we built in Sri Lanka, 95,000 houses. This particular project remains as the largest rehabilitation project that has ever been undertaken in the world, in the contemporary world. All using the same technologies and using the same template of technologies that I'm talking about. And Uttarakhand, a very short story to finish it off. Uttarakhand, I was actually in a traumatic condition. They diagnosed some major problems with my health and things like that. I was actually awaiting an operation. And when this call came from Uttarakhand, I went there and I flew above the disaster-struck area. And the Chief Minister actually called me one day. Second day after I went to Uttarakhand, I was not very familiar with Uttarakhand. I'd gone there once or twice, Dehradun, Haridwar and the rest of it, where I saw the devastations that happened, and I was called to the press meet. Suddenly, the Chief Minister introduced me as the person who is going to design the rehabilitation policy for Uttarakhand. And the media, I was not prepared, I was not prepared. And they asked me, the BBC, the correspondent, the battery of press people in front, they asked me to give the first question that was fired at me was about, can you give me a one-liner strategy for rehabilitation of the affected people? One-liner strategy? I was unprepared, I told you. I thought for a minute. I had a meditative contemplation. And then I said, look, this is a holy land. It's a holy land. You have to tread on it softly. Then the volley of questions started, What do you mean by that? What do you mean by Uttarakhand being a holy land? And why do you say that you have to tread on it softly? I said, look at the geology. Look at the soil profile of Uttarakhand. It doesn't have clay. It has only sand, volcanic sand. If you want to build on volcanic soil, you have to be careful. You have to be very careful about the architectural strategies, design strategies. You have to be very careful about the structure. So that is how I led that conversation. Wherever you go, such questions can come back to you. You have to be prepared for that. You have to be braced for that. I'm telling you, so you have to have a basic knowledge about the soil, you have to have a basic knowledge of services, you have to have a basic knowledge of structures. You have to be confident if you're trying to talk about technologies. Disaster technologies, I'll come for a minute before I conclude on this, I told you disasters are opportunities to push in. One of the questions that continuously people keep on asking to me is about the strength and validity of the technology. People have a notion that the technologies that we are trying to promote are less strong, less durable, and less long-lasting. They say that there's limited life. Through my buildings, this one thing, I made it mandatory, what I call as habitat literacy, to tell people that these technologies, these design strategies are as strong, as durable, as long-lasting as any other conventional technology. Once that is something that you need to fight, all the time. If that faith comes in the technologies, then the rest of it is history. Yeah, thank you.
Sir, you're known for your value-based practice. Can you please talk to our audience about your design philosophy and the kind of projects you do?
Yeah, I've been sticking to my ideals and convictions and my attitudes all along this thing. And you have to, for the young generation of architects, this is something that I want to tell you on the outset. If you want to be noticed, if your work needs to be noticed, you have to take a less traveled way. Less traveled ways will always take you to amazing vistas. This is my life story too. I believe that every building that you are going to design in future should have a story to tell the client. It should be based on honesty and truthfulness. Very, very important. India needs interventions. Your architecture should be value-based, based on truthfulness and honesty. That is when I started looking at one mantra which I keep very close to my heart. Local is a mantra for me. Talking about local capabilities, usage of local materials, and usage of local technologies. How do you expand on that is the domain of my work, if you really look at it. I've been doing a lot of buildings in local materials like earth, for instance. Just for your information, for the last 15 years, I've been actually concentrating on earth-based buildings. I built 10,000s of earth buildings across the world. And the largest earth building in the world, which measures around a few lakh square feet, was done by me in Bangladesh in a place near Dhaka. The whole university, institutional building, built entirely out of mud. Why I extol the virtues of mud is because of all the reasons that I use for. I have my template for selecting a material, selecting a technology. One, I talk about local availability. It should be insulating because we are in a tropical climate. You want cooler interiors. So with the materials and technologies that you promote instead of contrived air conditioning, can we talk about a breathing house, which will insulate? You need cooler insides. You need, sometimes during winter, you want hotter insides. So can we have a climate resilient kind of an architecture? So that becomes one of the determinants. You want disaster mitigancy, you want all that thing, and local availability, local capability, cost, energy efficiency, eco-sensitivity, and the rest of it is, they form the part of my local template of selecting the materials and technology. In the future, when you start about materials and technologies are tools with which an architect expresses himself. When I talk about a dream being realized in the three-dimensional form, you talk about it, you design it in a two-dimensional way. When you actually convert it into a three-dimensional entity, you want this language of materials. And where else can you get such beautiful mud in the world? I talk about mud because it's a very versatile material. It's a low-cost material. It's a very sensitive material. You don't have to. It doesn't have a cost. If you take it from your own this thing, the only thing is that you have to choose the material with which you have to build it. You have to use that template when you talk about it. So I talk about local materials because it gives opportunities for the local people to. Where else, I'm telling you, in India, this is what I want to tell you. The legacy of traditional architecture, vernacular architecture is so profound, so profound. The skill sets that Indian masons cannot be compared with anybody else. The beautiful carpentry skills, the masonry skills that you can see it in the various buildings, churches, temples across the country. The skill sets of our masons and our local masons and our carpenters are unparalleled. This is something that you have to keep very close to this thing. This is my philosophy and I want to extend it. And then you're going to build it for a person who have a name, who have an identity. So no two buildings can be alike. You have to not only discover their physical requirements, but also your building should address metaphysical requirements of a person. If a person loves music, you need to, when you design a house, you need to have a place to sing, a place to listen to music, a place where you can dream, a place where you can read, a place where you can do your pujas, a place for contemplation, a place for meditation. All these things that makes a person alive, you get it. I've done many houses for the writers, for the artists, one of the buildings that I want to bring to your attention is one little building that Laurie Baker did for a dancer. The shape of the building was one twirl of a dancer. So how do you take this metaphysical requirements of a person into a built-up form? Is something that's very challenging for an architect, challenging for an architect. And especially when you're doing cost-effective, energy-efficient, resource-efficient architecture, the building has to look good. It should have that experiential coefficient, it should look good, it should look different. Only then it will get noticed. By doing that, I'm achieving a whole selfish goal. My goal is to promote a technology, promote what I call as sensitive architecture. If the building looks good, different, people get to notice that building. And through that building, I'll be able to promote what I call as cost-efficient, resource-efficient, value-based architecture. When you enter a house, it should feel different, it should feel good. How do you do that? You bring in natural light in, you bring in natural ventilation in. Where else can you find a place like India? I'm telling you. Because such bright sun and such wind flowing across the country. We have sea on three sides. If you can really, bring that wind into, instead of going for unnatural ways of ventilation, COVID days actually brought the important questions of having healthy habitats. One of the most critical determinant of healthy houses was to ensure cross ventilation. I'm telling you, indoor air quality is a quality that's being heavily compromised across the country. So you have to go for natural ventilation, natural lighting, thereby extolling the virtues. Everything will have to be done on a context, a regional context. The houses that I built in Kerala are going to be different from the houses that you build in Maharashtra. The regional context is important. Also, it has to address when I say regional context, even the cultural context is very important. It's not only the vocabulary of materials that are available at a local setting, it's also the mindscape. When I say the mindscape, I talk about the cultural context. It has to address that cultural need, the way you do things. Your lifestyle is based on your cultural habits that you imbibe. So if an architect can respond to such things, then your architecture will remain. People will accept it and you will go forward. And India needs such interventions right now. Why? Because I should tell you that. This is something that when you go ahead, you should keep it with you. We, architects, as a fraternity, we should realize that we are primarily responsible for the climate change. I know it's a brutal statement, but we are primarily responsible for building change because of the undesirable activities that are happening in the construction sector, adding to the woes. I don't want to go at length with that, but many of the activities which are, during the production of such building materials, we eat away a lot of energy. We need energy efficiency in whatever we do. Water, the potable water is being wasted for flushing out the dirt from our toilet. Such habits will aggravate the situation. And we should realize that as responsible citizens who are in the built-up sector, we should be very clear about our contribution. We have inherited the Mother Earth, and we should give it back with the same compassion and passion back to the future generation. And as a responsible architect, you should respond to these needs of the time.
Sir, you were referring to the material selection process. So we got an opportunity when we met you in Trivandrum. So why don't we show that process to our audience? Can we have the AV, please?
This is the material with which actually I'm making my buildings now. I'm very passionate about this particular material because the properties of the materials are immense. Not only the engineering properties, the smell of it, everything is so critical, This is not a romantic notion about it, but the color, smell, everything is important, texture. That's all important for an architect, because architect always talks about the colors and the textures when you make walls and the rest of it. But I am taking it, I use mud because it has got wonderful engineering properties in terms of strength, in terms of durability. It has got very wonderful properties. But as you know, mud has got its limitations. That is something that we need to, we need to really do it. We have to feel the mud, This way you have to hold it with your hand and feel the mud, This is how we select mud. Every mud is, every kind of earth is not good for construction. We look at it. Mud has got four different these things. It has got sand, it has got silt, it has got gravel. You see the gravel here, you see the gravel, and that is how we grade this thing. We need to have a certain combination of sand in that, we need to have silt in that, we need to have a little clay in that. That is what binds it. And there are certain tests that we do. I'll just show you something. We actually, now I put a little this thing, and if it holds, then this mud is good enough for construction. You see, it's like a ball. It holds, it holds. You can see it. It holds, and this is how we actually test our mud. Another test is a very simple test which can be done at the site. We actually go to rural areas and do it, and this is how we do it. We make it into a cigar kind of a thing. Here, as you can see, I'm finding it very difficult to do that. That means There's little clay in that. We need little more clay in that, you know. So this is how we test it, you know. We even look at the color, you know. If it's a musty color, for instance, you know, I'm starting the building, and here you see the difference. You see the difference. See the colors, different colors. This is musty. This is musty because these have got this is the topsoil where got a lot of organic impurities, you know. There are decayed leaves and the rest of it. That's why this cannot be used for mud construction because of one reason. Mud gets attacked by termites, you know, and this has got a lot of termites in it. This layer of mud will have a lot of termites in that. And you see the difference of colors, you know. This is a little more brownish, this is blackish, and this is something that we don't actually use for construction at all. And this again, I failed this test probably. Yeah, I failed this test of making a cigar out of it. And another thing, let me tell you, this is going to be little ridiculous for you, you know. For this is what we do in rural areas. We taste mud, you know. We take mud like that and put it in a bowl and we taste it. The test is, if it grates between the teeth, it means there's a lot of sand in that. If it melts like chocolate, it means there's a lot of clay in that. And as you know, if you have silt in that, that means, I mean, it's like eating duff, you know. And gravel, of course, you break your teeth. So these are tests that we do at the site to test the components, you know. And you can't take it to the laboratory always, you know. Mud is a local material, and let me tell you, why we flaunt mud is because you should understand that 80% of Indian households, that's a staggering majority, 80% of India's households actually lives in mud houses, and we do the foundation in mud. This is what we are trying to, and let me tell you, all the structural institutions which certify, authenticate the technologies have identified this as a future material. It is there everywhere. The only thing is that you have to choose real mud. I am telling you, you can make even multi-story buildings with mud. And I'm telling you with such passion because I built the spectrum of mud buildings that I have done is unparalleled in the world. And when I'm talking about it, the largest mud building in the world was done by me in Bangladesh, measuring around 600,000 square feet, which I think is the largest mud building in the world today, in the contemporary world. It's not a low-cost material, it's a no-cost material because you can take it from your own ground, you know, low-cost, and you don't need that volume. You don't need that volume. You need only a little this thing to make big buildings like that. And it's insulating, cost-effective. It doesn't go through a process of energy efficient, eco-sensitive, and what more quality that you're looking for. We have a template for selecting materials and technologies, and mud, in fact, qualifies for everything. And that's why this remains as my favorite material. Thousands of buildings across the country, and we are going ahead with this.
So we have a few upcoming architects with us here, and they would definitely want to have an interaction with you. Do you mind addressing their questions, please?
Not at all.
Who's going for the first question? Yeah, please go ahead.
Hello, sir. My name is Anushka Deshpande. So my question to you was, who has been your inspiration behind such strong beliefs?
You know, my inspiration, I should tell you, as a common man of India, as R.K. Lakshman puts it, the common man of India, I mean, every person has their own dreams and this thing. So they continue to inspire me, especially the most marginalized sections of society, the tribals, such cultural legacy is there, and the poor people who inherit the earth. That is on a general platform. As a person, there are a lot of people who have inspired me for different reasons. For instance, the Spanish architect Antonio Gaudí, who, I mean, through his magical interventions, he has inspired me. Japanese architect called Takeo Ando, he inspires me because I find his space as meditative. I mean, that his architecture talks about meditative spaces. Frank Lloyd Wright, obviously, who is known as the father of organic architecture, he continues to inspire me. But if you really look at one single influence that has really formulated my forward, it is Laurie Baker. Because as I told you, there was no gap between word and deed. And that's why I consider him as probably one of the foremost influences of my journey in architecture. Yeah.
Who's going next?
Myself, Aman Malviya. You were clear about the path you choose. Were you address commercial projects in your design?
Yes, I do. I do commercial projects. I don't endorse the spirit of that architecture, but I do it for one reason that I told you before. You know, if I want to take the technology forward, I should tell the people that these technologies can be used for any kind of buildings. That includes commercial spaces. Now, commercial spaces talks about different kind of strategy now because it optimizes those spaces. Commercial spaces are always measured in square feet, you know, that is the thing. So with this is very important in architecture now. With small spaces, with small areas, how can you increase the activities, commercial activity of space, which is very challenging, you know. We are talking about smaller areas and bigger needs. So that's the challenge that the new generation of architects are going to face. You should actually look at some of the commercial interiors that are actually happening, especially in Scandinavian countries. I travel a lot. Scandinavian countries where a new generation of new architects are coming out with such stunning answers to commercial interiors. You know, talk about mezzanine areas, stacking up areas and things like that by adding a new flavor to architecture. Yeah.
Who's going next? Yes, please.
Hello, sir. Myself, Sai, and my question to you is, we as architects are supposed to serve the community, and we see the upcoming architects are highly influenced with the Western culture of design. So how do you suggest we balance the modern principles and sustainability when it comes to the Indian context and Indianness?
Yeah, your question implies that there's a conflict. I'm actually talking about a resilient architecture, style of resilient architecture. I'm talking about confluence. You know, the advance in technology and the materials, that's the vocabulary with which architect works, should be contemporary. It should, see, it's technology. The dynamics technology, the market scene is changing very fast. And your architecture should enhance, I'm telling you, enhance. I'm reiterating the way, enhance the quality of architecture, the material vocabulary that you're using in the modern times should enhance your architecture. But it doesn't dilute the convictions, you get it? It doesn't differentiate between community architecture and an individual personalized architecture. What I mean to say is that everything that, if it's a community, if it's an individual, it should be personal architecture. It should respond to the times, it should respond to the scenario in which you are going to build. And once that is done, I am telling you, a building will be a meaningful intervention into the domain of architecture. That's my short answer to you.
Who's going next? We can take a last question now.
Myself, Himisha Patel. My question is, since you follow Rory Baker, when I studied about him, he said bare minimum for a living, like living in a bare minimum 76 years ago. But right now, looking at the current situation, we live in a fast accelerating world. So how can we inculcate that notion in our current lives? What will be the mindset and how together we can work towards it?
When he said bare necessities, that had a completely different connotation, let me tell you that. He was, through his architecture, he was actually extolling the virtues of an Indian concept. Indian concept was the incremental growth of a house that grows. That was the premise on which, the concept on which Laurie Baker was working all his lifetime. What he said was, whatever is necessary now, let us build it. The rest of it can happen later. That was what he meant by bare necessities. This is actually more relevant now because the family structures have changed. everybody is talking about nuclear families. And, the family structure is getting fragmented now. You see, we have come to a stage where each room becomes a house in itself. So that's the change in this thing. And I think over the years, Laurie Baker, what he was trying to express through his architecture has become more relevant to the times now.
Sir, I strongly believe a successful person is a result of a lot of hard work, dedication, passion, but there's also a very strong moral support system which goes behind that person. And while we were meeting you in Trivandrum, we got an opportunity to meet a few of your clients, your friends, your relatives. So let us see what they have to say about you.
I'm G. Vijayaraghavan, and I'm based out of Trivandrum. I've known Shankar for over 35 years now. In fact, I've known him much before that, but knowing him during that period, how I started first interacting with him as a professional architect was when I was looking at the selection of architects for the technology park in Trivandrum, which is India's first technology park. Shankar did not compete on that because our criteria was completely different. But later on, when we did the National Institute of Speech and Hearing, incidentally, Shankar had actually helped me identify that property for Technopark. But later on, that was taken over by the National Institute of Speech and Hearing, and Shankar was the architect there. What I liked about Shankar is different from many architects that you would see, is that I would say his buildings look better than his drawings. Okay? Whether that's a credit or not is something which you should discount, but his buildings definitely look better than the drawings and the illustration that he gives when presenting the whole thing one.
This is Dr. Hariharanath and my wife, Mrs. Revati.
Hi.
We are from Andhra Pradesh, and I work as a senior scientist in Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, ISRO, Trivandrum. And this house was built from 2009 to 2010, and it took only 8 months to complete this house. And we nearly 12 my friends, colleagues, we took this 80 cents land and we divided among 12 people, and afterwards we all went to construct this house, and our friends selected many architects, but finally we have gone to Habitat Group of Technology. There we were not knowing earlier about Shankar sir and all, but after seeing his office and his style of the construction and the eco-friendly nature and cost effectiveness, we have fixed into this one. In fact, my friends, they backed out because of their lack of knowledge in this area, but we stick to this, and finally we are enjoying this. And this was constructed with mud bricks, and the house is very cool, and even my neighbors, friends and children are there very jealous when they came into the house. They feel that it is very cool, and children sometimes they are telling their parents, you sell their house and construct the house like this.
നമസ്കാരം, എൻ്റെ പേര് തില്ലൈ പാണ്ഡുരംഗൻ. ഞാൻ ഈ വീട് നിർമ്മിച്ചിരിക്കുന്നത് തിരുവനന്തപുരം ജില്ലയിലെ തിരുവല്ലം എന്ന് പറയുന്ന സ്ഥലത്ത് ഇടയാർ എന്നൊരു സ്ഥലത്താണ്. ആക്ച്വലി ഈ വീടെന്ന് പറയുന്നത് എല്ലാവർക്കും ഒരു വലിയൊരു സ്വപ്നമാണ്. ആക്ച്വലി ഞാൻ ഈ വീട് നിർമ്മിക്കുന്നത് എൻ്റെ അമ്മയ്ക്കും എൻ്റെ സഹോദരന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടാണ്. ആക്ച്വലി സഹോദരൻ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഒരു ചെറിയൊരു കട നടത്തുന്ന ഒരു വ്യക്തിയാണ്. അപ്പം ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് ഗവൺമെൻറ് വഴി, നമുക്ക് കേരള ഗവൺമെൻറ് വഴി ഒരു 4 ലക്ഷം രൂപ.
I am Shankar's wife, Sugata, and I've been with him for the last 34 years. It's been a very pleasant journey. But I should say that he is rather wedded to architecture. And one funny incident, there's not been much of funny things happened in life, but one, if you can call it funny, one thing which happened in our life was that our son is a precious baby. We got him after a few years, and when I went for the delivery, I went all alone. It happened, and he happened to know about it after 2-3 hours. He was out of the town, and when he came back, somebody told him that now you are a father. And another thing that I want to tell about him, he is the most beautiful human being I've ever met. He is the kindest soul, but every time I will have to remind him that kindness begins at home, charity begins at home. That is all I have to tell about Shankar. I'm extremely proud of him even now for everything that he had done for the society. He had everything that he did for architecture, for all his contributions. I'm extremely proud.
So this segment was powered by
Tostem, framing the beauty of living.
We all are aware that you were conferred with the Padma Shree, which of course is a huge achievement. Can you share with us that story? What was that moment? How did the news reach you?
Yeah, initially, actually, I didn't know about my nomination to this award. And finally, it got scrolled in the local media. And that is when my friends started calling me. And then I knew about it, that I was in the list, That was on January 25th, 2011, when I knew that I'm in that list. Initially, I was overwhelmed because, down south, away from the media attentions, one gets recognized. So that way I felt very happy about it and very happy about it. But let me tell you this, for an architect, it was a milestone in my life. I do realize it was a milestone. But I believe in a Sanskrit, this thing, which goes like this. Karmanye bhatikaraste ma phaleshu kadajana. Action is your duty. Fruit is not thy concern. All my life, I've been holding the principles of architecture through my interventions in architecture. And that way it had been a long journey, This long journey meant, I don't know whether you know about it. I've literally sustained this movement through my blood, my sweat, and my tears. And, it's a long journey. And Padma Shree actually came as a little milestone for me.
Okay.
To relax, sit, contemplate. But Padma Shree actually, this national honor urges you, bestows on you more responsibilities to work more for the country, more for the polity. How can you enhance the social fabric of India? And that is what this is all about, It's to a movement, It's to a people's movement that this Padma Shree was bestowed, not really on me, for the convictions, for the value-based architecture, for the disaster-resistant architecture that I was awarded with. That way, I'm extremely grateful. I feel more focused, in fact. That has urged me to better ways of looking at architecture, better ways of building, better ways of looking at the social fabric of India. It has actually given me more responsibilities to the social polity of India. Yeah.
So one last question. You are such a, talented and popular architect. But what made you choose the non-profit sector as your mainstream profession?
A lot of people, all along my life had been asking why I chose voluntary sector. Initially, in fact, I started working for the government for some time. But very soon I realized that I still believe that, government can change the destinies of millions, Stroke of a pen, by a decision, policy decision, they can do it. All my life I had been fighting for one cause, making housing as a fundamental right in India. But I failed. I'm continuing to fight, but I failed to make housing as a fundamental right. If the government decides that, yes, housing is a fundamental right, then all the people in India will have access to a safe and thing. When I came into architecture, I realized that this is one of the problems that independent India had not been able to comprehend properly. I'm telling you, we were talking about makan, we were talking about dresses, we were talking about kapada, we were talking about food. In food and cloth sector, we actually achieved self-reliance within a few years after independence. But people never realized that there's a great problem with makan. What are we talking about? We are talking about so many millions of families without anything over their head. They don't have adequate shelters. And I'm an architect, qualified architect, and I thought through my interventions, I should at least address this issue of the houseless, marginalized, poor people living on the, because I believe that they have also, they have a right to dream, a right to have a good little safe shelter where they can. After I started working with the government, I realized that government is a very abstract term. It doesn't mean many things. That is when I turned to voluntary action. Through voluntary action, I still believe that voluntary action is the only way out. Instead of having a firm like Shankar and Associates, I opted for Habitat Technology because I wanted this to become a people's movement. Yes. When you ask me, what is your singular achievement that makes you very proud? I've been able to initiate, pioneer a people-based, value-based movement in sustainable architecture that has actually given hopes to millions of people, millions across the world. I'm not talking about India per se, because my works actually span across Asia and Europe. And through that, I've been able to address a particular need of a country, of a population, of a community. That is why I have based myself, Habitat Technology Group, in that domain of voluntary action. That's why, that is how I started Habitat Technology Group.
And that's why you are known as the people's architect in Kerala. Shankar sir, I wish this conversation goes on for a few more hours, but unfortunately we have to stop it somewhere. So on a closing note, we would like to have a small photo moment with you. Can I have the portraits, please? So this moment was powered by Dimore by Qtone. Luxury windows and tiles for your homes. हम लोगों का फोटोग्राफ तो हो गया. आप लोग को लेना है सर के साथ फोटो या सेल्फी तो आ जाओ. अरे आ जाओ आ जाओ. So ये थे हमारे शंकर सर from Trivandrum. His simplicity and down-to-earth nature is an inspiration for millions of people like us. So दोस्तों, आज का कारवा यहीं तक था. We would like to thank our title sponsor, Dostem Windows, our powered by sponsor, Dimore by Qtone, and our associate sponsor, Vox. जल्दी मिलेंगे Legends of Design के अगले एपिसोड में. तब तक गुड नाइट, शब्बा खैर, शुक्रिया. Hi, I have an announcement. दोस्तों, आज के इस सोशल मीडिया के दौर में आइए हम आपको लेके चलते हैं उस जमाने में जहां पे कम्युनिकेशन होता था लेटर्स से. वॉक्स प्रेजेंट्स लेटर टू लेजेंड्स. आप अपने फेवरेट लेजेंड्स को इस एड्रेस पर खत लिखिए एंड वी विल इंश्योर कि आपके लेटर्स हम आपके फेवरेट लेजेंड्स तक पहुंचा देंगे.